Welcome to ArtBookNook. My name is Kay, where I share with you my amazing collection of art and craft books. In this video, we're going to look into the bold and dazzling world of Anne Abgott, an inspirational and very generous artist. At 85 years young, she's still filling her days with light, colour and an enthusiasm that's just impossible to ignore. Her paintings are so brilliantly vibrant, you almost feel that you should be reaching for a pair of sunglasses before turning the page. I'm really excited to share this book with you, not just because Anne's style and choice of subjects are so unusual, but because the more I researched her and learnt about Anne, the more I found myself resonating with her on a personal level. And look, I actually have 2 copies of Anne's book, which just goes to tell you how inspirational I actually find her work. Anne is a multi-award winning artist, and her book promises to teach you how to bring the full glow of watercolour into your paintings by using a technique she calls mingling colour, and dares you to create magic. Here is a brief synopsis about Anne, along with acknowledgements to the people who've supported her on her artistic journey. I must mention the painting entitled A Date with Jack. Anne works on quite a large scale, and this painting is 16 by 20 inches, just to give you a sense of the size. While researching Anne, I came across a fascinating video where she explains how she selects and composes her still life paintings. It's quite unlike anything I've seen before from any other artist. I found her process absolutely fascinating, so I've linked to that video for you in the description below. The book is divided into 6 main sections: colour, colour mingling, composition, constructing a painting using photographs, value, other useful techniques, and shadows. So let's explore. In the introduction, Anne explains that she's always been brave when it comes to colour. Her preferred technique, mingling transparent pigments directly on the paper, grew out of her desire to work more quickly without relying on glazing, which is the traditional method of building colour in several transparent layers. Anne encourages you to keep practicing, reminding you that the more you paint, the more successful you'll become. And also, accept failure as part of the learning process. Anne recommends that you carve out time in your diary every week to paint. Set yourself yearly goals, for example 20 paintings, and enter several competitive shows. The idea is to give you focus and a goal, because it's all too easy to drift, isn't it? And before you know it, another year has passed. I would love to read you everything in this introduction because it's so filled with passion from Anne, but it would take too long. I'd just encourage you to buy a copy of her book because it really is inspirational. Anne lists her favourite watercolour pigments and groups them by manufacturer, which is very helpful, especially if you're trying to match her palette. She also shares the watercolour paper she prefers to paint on and explains why that particular surface and make suits her approach. She also uses plastic palettes as opposed to ceramic ones, simply because they're lighter to handle. The huge variety of brushes on the market can be quite confusing, and Anne acknowledges this. She will explain which brushes she prefers for her different techniques as we progress through her book, and she includes a few practical tips on how to look after them. She also talks about what she calls scrubbers. These are brushes originally designed for fabric dyes. Anne uses these to lift out pigment, soften edges and tidy up splatters, because they're firm enough to do the job but gentle enough not to damage the watercolour paper. And here Anne covers the use of masking fluid and provides several helpful hints and tips for using it successfully. Every artist has a few unusual tools in their bag of tricks, odd little items and ideas picked up from other artists or teachers along the way, and Anne is no exception. Here she shares some of the essentials she relies on to make her painting process easier. Anne has given you an overview of the basic tools and materials, so now let's move on to the exciting section, which is all about colour. It's important to know the colours in your palette so you can use them to their best advantage. Anne explains key colour terms such as primary and secondary colours, tertiary, complementary and analogous colours, plus colour temperature, which refers to how warm or cool a colour appears relative to its neighbour. She encourages you to play and experiment and create your own colour wheel. She then moves on to pigment properties such as transparency, granulation, staining and permanence, explaining the differences. Coming from an oil and pastel background myself, this was exactly the sort of information I found invaluable when I first began working with watercolours. Anne has done a really good job of condensing all of this information into just a couple of pages for you. The colour charts here and on the following 2 pages are based on the pigments Anne keeps in her own palette. What she's done is organise them into separate charts that mirror the 4 pigment properties she introduced on the previous pages. On the left-hand page we begin with colour temperature, warm colours on the left transitioning to cool colours on the right, set out in neat rows of colour families, reds, yellows and so on. The same approach is used for opacity on the right-hand page, moving from transparent to opaque. Then we have granulation, beginning with non-granulating pigments and moving all the way to heavily granulating ones, and finally staining colours, arranged from least staining to most staining. I've never seen colour charts organised entirely by pigment properties before, but I completely get and understand how useful this would be. It's such a valuable exercise it could save hours of time and a fair amount of frustration. It's certainly one that I'm going to undertake. Section 2, Colour Mingling. Anne discovered that mixing colour directly on the paper rather than in the palette created wonderful, glowing, lively, vibrant passages of colour. She also realised it sped up the whole painting process because she wasn't waiting for separate layers of paint to dry before adding the next. And here Anne explains how to mingle. The first method is to add one colour at a time directly onto the paper. The second method uses a double-loaded brush, a technique she turns to whenever she wants to create greys. Alongside the step-by-step photographs, Anne lists her keys to success, as well as how to adjust or shift the colours in a mingled area if you need to make changes. Anne now covers how to mingle different colours in turn, beginning with yellow. At the top of the page there's a helpful chart showing how to lighten or darken a tube colour, whether to add plain water or introduce a different pigment. In the bottom left corner, Anne explains the characteristics of each pigment listed in the chart and how it's likely to behave on the paper. Top right, we have a lovely example of the colour used in a painting, along with further ideas and suggestions for when you might choose that particular colour, in this case yellow, plus a few bonus tips to explore. The following pages cover mingling reds, blues, tube greens and violets, and concludes with a step-by-step demonstration of mingling the 3 main primary colours together. These pages follow the same pattern with the exception of the demonstration, so I'll let you enjoy them with some nice music, and I'll meet you when it comes to talking about the importance of greys. Wow, the vibrancy of the colours in this palette really does hit you, doesn't it? Greys are important in a painting because they give the viewer's eye a place to rest, and they're a wonderful way to connect shapes and unify a composition. Anne really dislikes tube greys as they often make her colours look dead and flat and a bit boring, and they're usually opaque and slightly chalky too. If you compare the top two rows of tube greys with the greys Anne mixes from her own palette, you'll see what she means. The mixed greys have far more colour variation and feel much more alive. Here we have two examples of paintings that make use of the colour grey. In the top left piece, Anne has mingled the object's colour into its shadow, and she explains in detail which colours she's used and how she approached it. In the bottom left painting, greys are everywhere, and she's created that sparkling silver bowl simply by saving the whites. Both paintings seem to shimmer, don't they? What now follows is a detailed step-by-step demonstration of a painting that makes full use of mingled greys. Anne begins with a reference photo in full colour and also in black and white, so she can clearly see the values. She'll talk more about values as we move further into the book. First she draws or traces the image onto her watercolour paper and then masks out the white areas she wants to preserve. Next, Anne paints the silver bowl, followed by the red pairs, then the yellow pairs and their stems. She clearly describes the colours she's mingling on the page as she works, so you can follow along with her choices step by step. In the final stages, Anne adds the shadows, removes the masking fluid, and deepens the darks in the bowl, along with the finishing touches, like the label on the yellow pear inside the bowl. And just look at how this painting glows. The colourful lacy shadows and the little blemishes on the pear's skin make the whole piece feel so alive. In section 3, on composition, we look at Anne's process for constructing a painting using photographs. Anne works exclusively from reference photos she's taken herself, and here she shares some of her favourite tricks and shortcuts for building a strong composition from them. Anne prefers to work indoors, away from wind, dust and the elements, where she has time to think and plan. Working from reference photographs suits her style perfectly. She believes it's important to paint what you love and organises her photographs by subject so she can find them easily whenever inspiration strikes. With clear illustrations, Anne explains in detail what makes a good reference image, looking carefully at shapes, size, colour, texture, line and value. Anne often crops her photographs to find interesting arrangements of shapes, and she'll also trace elements from several different images and combine them to create a single composition. On the right hand page you can see how she's taken 3 separate photographs of parakeets and experimented with different arrangements before choosing a final sketch to base her painting on. Here we have a short demonstration on how to eliminate unnecessary details from a scene. Photographs capture far more information than a painting will ever need, so an artist needs to remove anything that's distracting or not essential. Just because something is in the photograph doesn't mean you have to paint it. Anne places a piece of tracing paper over her reference photograph and lightly traces the main subject and centre of interest. From there, she talks you through each stage of the painting process, all the way to the finished piece. When nature doesn't provide you with the perfect photograph, you can combine subjects with sketches, which are an invaluable source of reference material and just as useful as photographs. In this example, Anne pairs a reference photo of window shutters with a sketch she once made of interesting shadow shapes to create a final composition, which she then transfers onto her watercolour paper. She begins by masking the shadow shapes of the leaves, then paints the window shutters and the tree branch. She then adds the leaf and tree branch shadows, removes the masking fluid and completes the painting by adding leaves to the tree in the top right corner. Anne has filmed 3 DVDs, one of which is entirely devoted to shadow techniques. It was originally produced by Northlight Books, a company that I believe no longer exists. If you know different, please let me know. But you can still watch Anne's DVD on the Artists Network website. And if you look closely, you'll see this exact same painting just above Anne's left shoulder. The final demonstration in this chapter is a painting that holds deep personal meaning for Anne. She created it for her son-in-law, who very sadly died from brain cancer far too young. Anne has dedicated this book to him, saying he was one of the bravest, kindest human beings she's ever known. I was so very sorry to learn this, and it makes me treasure her book even more. Anne completed this painting for him from a photograph of a boat in Corsica. Chapter 4 is all about value, the key to creating dimension on a flat piece of paper. And just look at this painting of a bowl of cherries. It's almost bouncing off the page. It's absolutely dazzling. Value is the relative lightness or darkness of a colour. You simply can't make a successful painting if the values are wrong, so Anne relies on a couple of essential tools to help her judge them accurately. Black and white copies of her reference photographs and value scales, the full range of a pigment from dark to light. To create your own value scales, you start with the pure pigment and gradually add more water to lighten it. Working from a black and white reference has another advantage too. It breaks the subject down into a clear map of darks and lights, which means you could paint a red flower blue, for example, simply by following the value map provided by the black and white copy. Our eyes can see almost an infinite number of values between dark and light, so we need to simplify them. A painting should have a value pattern that reads clearly from across a room. Anne suggests checking this by enlarging your black and white reference to the same size as your painting and comparing the two. It's a simple way to see where you might need to adjust the values in your work. Anne's painting of the steps in an old Greek town is created using a simple three-value system: the white of the paper, the darks and the midtones. But notice that within those midtones there's still a range of values, giving the scene depth and atmosphere. Here we have an exercise with a simple composition for you to practice following the value pattern from a black and white photograph. Anne often works in a series, painting many different versions of the same subject. She's painted green olives numerous times. Working this way helps her get into the zone, and she doesn't need to spend as much time waiting for paint to dry between stages. Anne's detailed demonstration here will teach you how to mingle whites on a wet surface. You may already know that watercolour dries at least one shade lighter than when the wet paint is applied, but did you know that if you wet the paper first, the colour will dry even lighter again? Anne uses this to her advantage when saving whites and lighter passages. This project is a lovely challenge, helping you paint a white bowl on a white surface while still reflecting the colours from the surrounding objects. Like many of us, Anne has taken workshops over the years with artists she admires, always hoping to discover the magic techniques behind their beautiful paintings. In this chapter, she shares several of the methods she uses to make her colours glow. We begin with some tips and examples on controlling water, which is fundamental to the medium of watercolour. In the bottom right, Anne compares colour mingling on wet versus dry paper, illustrating how differently the paint behaves in each case. And although Anne uses masking fluid, she much prefers to preserve her whites with water whenever possible. On the right-hand page, she's illustrated this in the paintings of the pears. The green pepper exercise will show you how to preserve the whites with water alone, without the need to use masking fluid. This approach gives you beautiful soft edges. In the painting of the blue glass vase, Anne uses both water and a little masking fluid. In that way, she achieves soft reflections along with the sharper, more reflective highlights. For years, Anne relied solely on saving the white of her paper, but eventually she began using gesso with transparent watercolour, especially when painting hair, water, or repairing damaged areas of the watercolour paper. In this detailed demonstration, Anne shows you how she uses gesso to create the lights in the waves and the highlights in the tendrils of the child's hair. Sorry, Tinker's here again. And here we have the finished painting. Just look at the subtle shadows in the final piece. And on the right-hand page, Anne illustrates how to create different textural effects using a simple razor blade. Here she shares her keys to mingling intense colours to create an interesting, rich, dark background. And when you've had a chance to practice this technique, you might like to try this project, which focuses on creating a dark background around a light subject. The background in this painting gives the effect of more flowers, doesn't it? Anne describes yellow as a pushy colour and suggests you try painting any other colour on a scrap of paper and then drop yellow into it. Watch how the yellow pushes the other colours away. People often tell Anne that her paintings seem to glow, and for that she gives full credit to underpainting in transparent yellow pigments such as New Gamboge or Aureolin yellow. In the painting of the cherries, you can see how the yellow underpainting has given the cherries a lovely warm glow. In this next demonstration of bottles and cherries, Anne shows you how to create vibrant, intense dark colours without having to keep returning to the painting again and again to apply multiple glazes. Anne tries to avoid doing that where she can because she likes to paint quickly. We've now reached the final chapter in Anne's incredible book, which explores the importance of shadows. You'll learn the difference between a good and a bad shadow, the colour of shadows and how mingled colours can add excitement and life to them all. Shadows are longest in the early morning and late afternoon, and subjects will float off the page without a shadow to anchor them to the ground in the painting. Light and shadow are a big part of what inspires Anne to paint. She finds it easier to paint from reference photographs as the light remains constant. The best time of day to take a reference photo is either first thing in the morning or late afternoon, when the shadows will be at their most interesting. On the left-hand page, notice the difference between the two photographs. Top is an example of a good shadow reference, and in the one below there isn't enough contrast. There are 4 different types of shadow: form, highlight, hard-edged and soft-edged. A successful painting usually includes both hard and soft edges, and Anne explains each of the 4 types in more detail. Just look at the shadows in her accomplished painting entitled "I've Got Egg on My Lace." They're really well observed. Seeing colours in shadows can be difficult. They're not uniform because they reflect the colours of the objects around them, so you just need to remember that shadows are not grey. They're full of lovely soft muted colours. Anne mingles colours when she paints her shadows to give them life and interest. Here is a demonstration for glazing shadows. Anne seldom uses glazing, but this technique is essential when painting shadows on flowers. You must make sure that each layer of transparent paint is completely dry before applying the next one. There is no limit to the number of layers. Just remember that each layer will darken the area. Glazing is also useful for correcting values or softening a hard edge. The next painting demonstrates the way shadows reflect the colours of the surrounding objects, which is an important concept to bear in mind when you're painting shadow shapes. The shapes of the shadows, along with the negative shapes they create, make for a really exciting painting. It's really striking, isn't it? Has a semi-abstract quality to it. Notice how the green of the palm fronds are reflected in the shadow on the wall, and also notice how the shadow has been rendered on the shutter. Do you recognise this painting? It's the one from Anne's DVD, which I mentioned earlier, and you can watch it on Artists Network. I've put the link for you in the description below. For the final project in Anne's book, you'll build on the techniques you've already explored, mingling greys and reflecting an object's colours into its shadows. An old metal colander has a star design cut out of it, which creates wonderfully interesting shadow shapes on the counter's surface. This is quite spectacular, isn't it? Well, That brings us to the end of Anne's fabulous book, Daring Colour. I absolutely love this book. It's full of energy and generous practical guidance, not to mention Anne's unmistakable passion for bold, glowing colour. We've looked at how she mingles transparent pigments directly on the paper, how she builds strong compositions from her own photographs, and how she uses value to give her paintings depth and life. Her demonstrations, from silver bowls and cherries to shimmering shadows and vibrant backgrounds, show just how far colour can take you when you let it move and mingle. It's a lovely reminder that watercolour doesn't have to be timid. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you enjoy bold colour? Are you tempted to have a go, or does this feel like too big a step outside your comfort zone? I always enjoy hearing from you, so please do let me know in the comments below. I reply to every one. In the description below, I've linked to Anne's website, where you can discover more about her and her incredible paintings. There's a really interesting video on her site that I strongly encourage you to watch. Anne talks through her process and gives you a little tour of her home, which she affectionately calls Paradise. It's essentially one big art studio where Anne sleeps, eats and lives. I was delighted to see this because my books, art materials and craft supplies are slowly taking over my home too. I've also added a few links to some YouTube videos I found, including an interview with Anne, a couple of demos, and a link to her Instagram page if you'd like to follow Anne and her work there. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope you found my review helpful, and if you decide to purchase your own copy of Daring Colour by Anne Abgott, the links in the description below help to support my channel. I'll earn a very small commission at no additional cost to you, but every little really does help, and I'm very grateful. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, or even better, a share or a hype. It really does help the video to reach more people. And please let me know in the comments if there's a book that you would like me to review that I haven't reviewed yet. I'm always happy to oblige. So until next time, happy painting!